So, well, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I was born in Brandon, and that's where I spent the first few years of my life. My mom and dad had separated, so I moved out to the farm with my dad when I was about 12, and lived out there until I moved back into the city. I've always been kind of a rural person. I've always been a part of living in the rural community. Leaving Brandon, I went to Starbuck. Was in Starbuck for about 7 years or so. That's where we started my family. But my husband got a job at Milner Ridge, so we had to move to the other side of the city. Still not somebody who wanted to live in the city, so we kind of went from one little town to another little town. I always thought that was the best way for raising a family, to be able to let your kids ride their bike down the street and not have to worry about it. I mean, myself, being a young child in Brandon, it seemed safe. You could ride your bike, you could go to the park, you could disappear for the day. And to me, that's so important when raising a family, and that's how I raised my family. Both my kids have grown up in small towns, and it worries me a little bit about their street smarts when it comes to surviving in the city, but I think we gave them the best start.
Yeah, that story sounds familiar to me. There's so many families that move around and get different jobs, and we get a lot of people moving through Portage and Prairie. We get a lot of commuters as well.
Well, because Portage Lisgar is right on the outside of Winnipeg, and stretching so far, but I mean, an hour is not that far to commute, so you probably do get a lot of people driving into the city to go to work and then back to their safe haven, to their small community in the evening.
Now, had you spent much time in Portage prior to coming out as a candidate?
Well, yeah, I mean,
you come through, so a bit of familiarity. The reason I'm asking that is that it's always interesting because I've lived here for 30 years, and you're not immersed in things the way I am. But as someone who's come here and you've had time to spend in the community, is there anything about the community that struck you that was particularly interesting? What's your favorite thing?
Okay, so what I love about Portage is that it seems like a city center, even though it's not necessarily a city center. It's a smaller community.
Right.
But it does give you that sense that you have everything that you need here. I know living in Starbuck, we came out to the Portage Fair, with the kids when they were younger, because it was like a really wonderful sized fair, and of course it was a lot closer for us to come. But I really love the fact that there's, a little island, which is so gorgeous. I mean, it kind of gives like such uniqueness to this city, like you don't expect to see.
It's interesting because the history of the island. It's actually a lot of people don't know this. I'm also chair of the Heritage Committee, so I might bore you with some history details. But the crescent is actually man-made. The land was actually appropriated by the local government, and they pumped water into it to create a water feature. But I have to say, it's one of my favorite things in our community, and it really showed the foresight. Now, I've never looked into it, but I heard that council actually, a lot of the councillors lost their seats afterwards because it was a controversial thing at the time. But here we are,
so many years later,
and people are like, the island's a great thing.
It's beautiful. It's breathtaking. As you're driving along, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what the heck is this? So I think it's beautiful. I've been to Portage. I mean, I have an office on Saskatchewan Avenue.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Yeah, my department has an office here, so we've been providing services to the area for 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, or more. So, I mean, I definitely have to come here from time to time. I enjoy Portage, and of course, Portage not being that far from Brandon. I have friends that live in Portage. It's not really been a far stretch, and it's homey. It's it is what it is. Like when you live in a really small town, which I have, everybody is really interested in what everybody else is doing, and I have,
and I like that.
I love that.
I some people don't care for it, but I don't mind that people know.
There's nothing better when you're like, oh, and so, was living here, but they've moved on and such moved in.
I wanted to point out to you, because we do have a purpose to our driving today. On your left, you're going to see Campbell Soup. And about 40 years ago, we were the capital of soup making in Western Canada.
Yes.
And it disappeared. And the history of Portage has been one of like boom, kind of, and bust. And I've often said if we were to have like a creature to represent our community, it'd be the phoenix. Because we always seem to do really well in the end.
Yes.
We had Roquette that came in. But one of the questions we have from the Chamber of Commerce, of course, is, this is something that we had and then it disappeared. What would you suggest is the answer for sustainable rural economic development?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Portage is about to boom again. With the build of the FACT program coming out of Southport, I think that there should be some plans around thinking about the longevity. Now, FACT is the Future Aircraft Training, and they are going to be spending the next 5 years building that base in Southport, and then 25 years minimum training pilots.
Okay, now I didn't know that. I knew that it was up for renewal, so it has been renewed?
So the bid, there's two companies that had won the opportunity to bid. Their bids went in January, and they're just waiting to see who wins that bid now. And they have been building partnerships and relationships with different people within the province to get support and to prepare people for the massive build that's going to take place there. I would say it is shocking to me that Portage isn't already preparing themselves for this. And, looking at something that is going to need to be provided on a long-term basis. I mean, you said that they made soup there at one point in time.
Yes.
Fantastic. There's what the great thing about a big economic program like that is the spin-offs. There's going to be thousands and thousands of jobs for a minimum of 30 years.
Well, when we lost the air training, I think back in 1990, it was kind of crisis mode, and then we got it back. And what I like about it is, and I've had a chance to go out there, is it's high tech. It's large contracts. It's also international, and it really puts us on the map, I think.
Yes.
And we've been doing it since the Second World War, so it's something that's almost part of the nature of our community. So,
well, this is Canada's program, so I'm surprised that there hasn't been, more push within the province, or, to make sure that Portage is properly supported, to be able to manage this boom and to be able to capitalize on it as best as possible. There's going to be multiple subcontractors that come from this. When you're building, roads, or you're going to need gravel, and you're going to need...
the return on investment on that will likely be
huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like that right now would be a good time to start looking at where you have space, what kind of services are going to be needed, and how we can marry up with this big project that's going to come in. I mean, it is...
And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but maybe that will also tie into, some of the questions you're going to have about, immigration and what jobs are... you probably noticed our town is in a great... growth time. There's new construction going up all over the place, and newcomers are arriving, and they're changing our community for the better. And so that will probably play into it as well. I'm assuming we will need people to take all these to fill these positions.
Okay, so when you talk about longevity of a community, there are really just two ways to grow it and to sustain it. One is to encourage the new generation to stay and to continue to have families and to build on from that. But the other way is to bring in new people to your community and to find new reasons for them to come. And immigration is a fantastic way to solve the problem of a shortage of workers. We just went through a pandemic, and everybody's like, lost my job here and I lost my job there. I work in employment and training, and I can tell you that there is a labor shortage going on. And the labor shortage is going to get worse unless we find good ways to solve our problem.
I think it's interesting because it's like you're reading my mind. Because I'm taking you by MDC. And as you know, attitudes toward how we care for people who have cognitive challenges have changed, and this facility is closing. It was one, I think and I don't have the exact numbers, but I think probably at its peak it had over 1,000 people working here or something, and now it's down to a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
And they were good paying jobs, and it was a big part of the community. But of course, this is going to close, and that gets me to another question that came from the folks at the Chamber of Commerce: is that how do we retain skilled labor? So many of the people in here are highly trained, and all of them have been offered, I think, positions kind of equivalent to what they have, but it won't necessarily be in Portage or Prairie.
Right.
So how do we keep those skilled labor jobs here?
Well, first of all, you might be too late for the developmental center, but it is about keeping these services in place.
Right.
In Brandon, they closed the mental hospital many, many years ago.
Right.
And it displaced many people.
Right.
Some went to seniors' homes, some went to hospitals. But for me, the impact of what has happened since that hospital closed is really the scary piece. Where do the people go? You need to.
These are the jobs that you want people to have. They're career jobs, right?
These are career jobs,
and they let you buy a house and a car,
and they support the mental health and wellness of the people in our community. Those services start to dwindle, and the other problems start to rise.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because that was a question from PCRC. Actually, was about mental health. Coming out of COVID, there's been a lot of talk about it, but sometimes it's hard to point to precise things that we're trying to do. Is there anything that comes to mind for you that maybe is a government we need to try?
Well, one of the things that I thought about when we were coming out of COVID, because even my mother being a senior, and there is this sense of disconnect to society, and that's for the young workers all the way to our seniors for sure, where they've been disconnected and they're finding it hard to get back into that routine, and some things are becoming more overwhelming to others. And I believe that having a space where we can a safe place to talk and to share information. Sometimes people need a place to go to talk to other people so that they know that they're not having to internalize all of it, that they're not alone.
And I think you're talking really like outside the existing structures that we have.
Yes.
Like obviously anyone who's in crisis mode will have access to,
okay, but is there
some sort of...
I really don't know if our services are there for people in crisis.
Well, and that's what that's a good question. And if they're not there, then what's our next step?
Well, yes. I think closing places like that is a big mistake, to be honest. I think that the healthcare is so important, and it's beginning to dwindle in this province.
So you're thinking like perhaps repurposing
definitely
would be, while we might acknowledge that things have to change,
yes,
for the better, but maybe we can make something out of that.
Yeah, I think so. It is, you're right. Things change, and places close down, and plans change, but at the same time people stay the same. People still need to have those same supports available to us. Everything cannot be automated. Everything can't be sifted through 2 wards on a hospital. I just feel like we've really taken some of the care that used to be in place, and we've looked at it like it wasn't important, and we've done away with it.
Well, and I'm actually I've been asked to take you here last night. Friends at PCRC said I have to bring you down here. Now, one of the things that's a big question is that, and this has been in the news a lot, is that we don't have affordable housing. And that's true. Even in Portage and Prairie, which is a smaller place, our rent is high for your average person. However, I wanted to show you these units. These
Beautiful.
are built by MMF,
yes,
our local.
Absolutely gorgeous.
And they did a great job. Not only are they beautiful, but they have wheelchair access. People have yards. They're making it happen. And I guess my question for you is that, if that organization can do it here, how do we make that sort of thing happen for everyone? Because I think, everyone would like to have a place.
Well, I think that it's unfortunate that this riding continues to want to stay conservative because the conservative mindset is not social programming. And therefore, you're not going to have an MP fighting to bring social programs like affordable housing to your community. And I mean, that's why I think it's really important, why myself as a Liberal coming forward and saying, look, we have to change the way that we're doing business, because these are all programs available. These are all things that an MP can be speaking on behalf of this community and saying that we need to have more affordable housing. I noticed that there is a first-time homebuyers program.
Here, there is, through PCRC. Yeah.
Exactly. That is an amazing program, okay? So where I work, we have a similar program. And it literally is about moving people ahead and giving them an opportunity to stay where they are.
Yeah, and I had Mitch at PCRC explain to me, and there are things, you'd think you would know as a citizen, but you don't know. But I'd never considered, if you're a newcomer, it doesn't matter how great your job is or your capacity to pay. I mean, if you don't have the ability to have the down payment or the credit, you're not getting a house. And so programs like that really can make the difference.
That will keep people in your community for sure, because if the option is to look at a house within the Portage RM, or to look at a house, outside of the Portage RM, I mean, it makes perfect sense, to stay close to home. You have friends, your supports, your family, and help getting your down payment. That's amazing.
And I wanted to loop back to something you said, which was, you talked about our riding being conservative. It is very conservative. It's basically, we've had, I think, 4 premiers from here, all conservative. The only prime minister from Manitoba, also a conservative, Arthur Meehan, was from Portage and Prairie. So I think the last time we had a Liberal MP was probably in the 60s, I think, under Pierre Trudeau. They elected a Liberal here, and it might have had something to do with the boundary change. I don't know. But the question I have for you then is that this is going to be an uphill fight for you.
For sure.
What made you want to take up that challenge? Because it's not going to be easy.
Because I feel like this the entire province in the rural community, including my own growing up, has always been conservative. And then I feel like anybody who isn't conservative has just conceded to the fact that we're always going to be conservative. And that doesn't have to be the case. I feel like a lot of people do not believe in conservative beliefs. I feel like there's so many people who, when they really start to look at what the conservative policies are, they are more liberal. And they're like, oh, well, I didn't realize that they were doing that. Or I didn't realize that that's why this doesn't happen. And so I wanted to give people a real choice, a real opportunity to choose something else.
And I can sense the passion in your voice. And so the next question I have for you then is, what is it about the Liberal Party that drew you toward them federally?
Oh, well, that is from the first time I was ever able to vote.
Okay.
I voted for John Chrétien. I had turned 18 that year. And there was some politics at play at the time, and there were commercials that were coming out. One was from the Conservative Party saying, do we want a prime minister that talks like this or talks out of the side of his mouth? And right. I didn't know much about politics at the time, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to support a government that wasn't kind to people, that had the ability to make fun of somebody else who was running in politics just simply because of the way they looked. And so to me, that was the very first eye-opener to liberal politics that was for me. But I would say throughout my 20s, I really felt like I could relate more to policies coming from the Liberals.
Right.
And then when I began working for an Indigenous government, it was really apparent to me where social programming came and how it happened and how it was implemented, and what you need to do to believe in social programming is to really believe in a better Canada and to bring people forward and to lift people up. To say, well, this program I'm not eligible for, or that program I'm not eligible for. If you're not eligible for the programs, then you should be so grateful.
Right.
You should be so grateful that you do not need to depend on government for supports to help move your family forward. because I'm so excited to have programs that are implemented that literally do help, students with their student loans, so that they don't have to be in debt for 50 years. Will they pay off? Well, they went to school for 8. I want people to be able to own homes, and I want people to be able to access real training opportunities. And affordable housing is huge.
But I just wanted to go back for a moment to something you said about why you chose to be a liberal. And this isn't necessarily a political party issue, but it's something that kind of bothers me a little bit, and that's that as I got older, the politics in our country seems to be a little bit, well, not a little bit, it's meaner. And so I remember, I'm old enough to remember, debates with people like Stanfield, Broadbent, and Trudeau. And despite the fact that they often disagreed, they often did agree. And there was sort of a respectfulness. Do you think we can get that back? Or do you think that our politics has shifted forever? Because to be honest with you, and you look at social media and some of the things that are said, it seems to be a little bit, not a little bit, it's cruel.
It is.
Yeah, can we get back to those kind of values of respect for each other?
Or
are we too far gone?
I do think that tearing each other down in politics is just the most pathetic types of politics. I have not gone out and made it my business to say anything nasty about Maxine Bernier or Brandon Leslie or anyone else that is brave enough and compassionate enough to want to put their name forward.
Yeah, because it is tough, for sure.
It's tough, and it's dedicating a whole chunk of your life to nothing, but getting to that seat, and then the rest of your life fighting for the people that put you there. Right. And so I think is a really big gift and honor to be able to be given that opportunity to represent people. And I think by using politics that basically point out what others are doing that's wrong, or rather than saying this is what I would do that's better.
And I think people forget sometimes is that whether you win or lose, there's going to be hundreds of people who support you. And
thousands.
And it goes without, they go without voice. And that's always been problematic to me, because our electoral system is kind of skewed that you can win without having full support. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but while we're driving by here, I thought I'd mention to you that this is Agassiz, which you of course was the youth detention center from the Victorian era. Of course, it's closed and it's moved to Winnipeg. And again, those are jobs that have gone elsewhere, and we're putting in a new hospital. But because we're in the area of crime, the one thing that I often like to point out to people is that across Canada, over the last 25 years, we've seen a sharp decline in crime. Now, and people often say, well, that's not what I'm experiencing. And that's true. It could be that there are pockets where it's got worse. Certainly Portage has made the news. As you know, we were in Maclean's. I've lived here. I don't personally experience it, but we are on the list of one of the most violent areas in the country. And we also have a very high poverty rate. I think somewhere around 27% of the people who live here are living in poverty. So I guess the question I have for you is that, how do we, what do we need to do to address crime? And then I guess the second part of that is that what can we do to help address poverty?
Right. So first of all, the crime. My husband's a correctional officer, and it occurs to me when we have conversations that it seems like it's a lot of the same people who end up coming back into the system. And
I do think that's what's happening here as well. I think they're starting to gather some information on that.
And I don't know if we're doing a good enough job. We talk about rehabilitation, and that's what our jail system is set up to do, is to rehabilitate people and to prepare them to go back.
I took an introductory law course, mandatory in university. That's what they told me. Yes, it's to
But I don't know if we really are.
Right. Okay.
I've worked with programs where we're trying to work, within the jails to help prepare people for when they come out. And there is still a lot of silos and, well, this can be done or that can't be done. You can't really come in and meet with the inmates until they've been released. When somebody has been released, the plan has to already be in place. Where am I going to live? Where am I going to go to work? Who's going to be my supports? And far too often we drop them off at the bus station and say, see you later, good luck, don't get in trouble this time. And I feel like those plans could be better if we were supporting the inmates while they were there and helping them upon release. We could be saving a lot more than just accounting on the fact we've given them some counseling, and then we sent them back out. We need to do more to support them and to prepare them while they're in the system.
And that did remind me of the part 2 of that, which is that the poverty question. Our park is free and it's always full of people, and we have a library that you can go. But those sort of public institutions where there's no charge are very rare nowadays. So really you need money to navigate these things. And for Portage and Prairie, then what do we do to help raise people up so that then they can afford to have the lifestyle that we would like them to have?
Well, first of all, I want to start off by saying that people who are born in poverty are not destined to die in poverty. There are many paths that people can take to help move themselves forward, but they can't always see it for themselves. And I think having more services where people can just literally pick up the phone and say, look, I'm unemployed and I don't even know the first step about preparing myself to get back to work. Which sometimes is the biggest problem. They go and get a resume written.
I can tell you that for a fact, because part of my job was helping young people with ID, which actually became, people don't appreciate that it took us over a year to get a young man a social insurance number so he could get a job that he'd already been offered.
Yes.
But you can't work unless you have that number.
And a driver's
that's a
license.
huge barrier. Driver's license as well.
And I know, and I believe that the graduating driver's license is huge amongst young people. My son right now is in driver's ed, and which requires me to become a certified co-pilot, and that requires me to help him with at least 80 to 100 hours of car time. And I need to go on to the website and I need to approve the time.
But you've already put up some barriers, I can tell already.
Can you see the barriers?
You have to have internet access and a computer.
And really, the $70 to go into driver's ed to begin with.
Right.
And so really we're taking the people who are coming from healthy homes, who have financial, who have got that extra money available, and we're helping them become safe drivers. And what we're forgetting is that there is a whole group of people who aren't going to have the family supports at home, aren't going to have access to the money to pay for the driver's ed, and it's going to become harder and harder as they get older to get that license.
And it is frustrating for me because I know that there is a great demand for truck drivers right now.
Yes.
And the pay is
and school bus drivers.
Well, actually, right now we're advertising in our school division. We need school bus drivers.
Yes.
Like yesterday. So it's hard when you can see that there is a solution, but we just don't know how to get there.
I honestly believe it's going to have to take somebody who is living within the boundaries of the programs to say, why is this program not available to this group of people? Or why is this service not here? And what can we do to make this better? So the community revitalization, I see that they have this program where they're removing graffiti from different areas.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a program that I had been delivering and had a hand in help creating, and it was called It's My Community Too. And it took individuals who were having a really difficult time finding a job. And this could be for multiple reasons. This could be because they've never created a job history, that our career history, they've never created that work experience history. They maybe have made some bad decisions along the way and burnt just a couple too many employers, so now they're having a hard time.
I've seen that.
And we hired them, and we had them go out and clean up derelict parks, remove graffiti, clean up the yards of seniors or of community members that are unable to do it for themselves.
So I think you're really talking then MP as community mobilizer as well.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you have to understand how the networks work.
100%.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. I'm taking you, this is where I worked. Portage is our high school, of course. But I wanted to show you something here. This is just new. These diversity flags were put up in conjunction with PCRC and some students here. But what's interesting about these flags is that they represent all the nations of students who are now in our school system. And I can tell you that most of those flags wouldn't have been there when I started my career. This is all new. And which gets me into the next question from PCRC, which is I can only say that immigration has been a huge benefit for our community.
Yes.
It's not only making us a more interesting place to live, but they're also doing important work. They're filling positions that need to be filled. So immigration has really worked well for us, and we hope it continues to do so. I just wanted to get your opinion or your thoughts on immigration.
Yeah. Well, first of all, our country wouldn't be here without it. The whole country has been built on different versions of immigration.
I'm very happy my grandparents came here. Without that, I mean, I don't know what my life might be like.
Maybe wouldn't even exist.
I'm very thankful for immigration, yes.
But I feel like it does bring a lot more to the table than, today, than maybe what it's doing today is the same thing it was doing yesterday. It's bringing new ideas, new ways of doing things. A lot of people talk about, Canadian culture, what that looks like, and sometimes it looks a little bit like Scottish, and sometimes it looks a little more like Irish. Sometimes it's Ukrainian. Now we're seeing that you
can't put a finger on it, and that was the idea behind, I think, multiculturalism, which of course became a thing when I was in grade school. That was a federal initiative. That idea of building a country that's a multiplicity of cultures rather than a monoculture,
and everybody needs to share what their culture looks like, because without knowledge becomes racism. And so people really become racist when they have a lack of understanding of why somebody does something the way that they do or where it comes from.
Right.
And so I think immigration is fantastic. And I think in small communities like this, we need to take time to do, community barbecues and, bringing all community members together so that the newcomers can feel like they're included in this community. This is an older community. There's a lot of people who have been here for generations on generations. And like any, small community, new people who come in could be here for 10 or 15 years and you still see them as, oh, that's that new guy that moved to town.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that too about our community being old, because there's a local fellow writing a history book, and I'm more familiar with modern history in Portage, but he was writing about early history, and actually our community actually started as Métis community, and it was actually our first MLA, Bird, was Métis, also Premier Norquay, Métis, and then that changed demographically when we brought in what they called at that time the Easterners. Ontarians came in after Riel at Red River in 1870, and it actually changed the demographics of our community. So I totally get what you're saying about, immigration is going to change our community, but I think it has the potential today, because of the diversity, of making it just a better place to live. 100%. And I think the government obviously has a role to play in that.
Yes, they do.
So the next stop, we're just going to go along the crescent here. We're heading to our National Residential School Museum, and I think they just opened up for. They have been open for a while, but they're doing public tours. So I just on our way there, I was just wondering if you could share with me your thoughts about what you think reconciliation could look like for maybe Manitoba, but maybe what reconciliation could look like for Portage and Prairie.
Reconciliation is such a big piece of moving forward, and I really like to look at it like, really, reconciling the past, moving forward. And that means, coming forward, understanding, forgiving, and finding common ground to move forward. I think having a museum where people can go and learn and hear about the history is the start. That helps, because there are far too many Canadians that do not understand the magnitude of the pain that was inflicted amongst the Indigenous people.
And I think it has a particular interest here for a number of reasons. One is that we actually had a residential school here, basically within our city.
Yes.
There were two of them. This is the second that was built. And also that we're approaching, I think, about half our school-age children are Indigenous and Métis in our community. And, I've been involved in heritage ever since I moved here, but, we haven't been telling the stories of First People or of the Métis.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting better at it. But I do think that the federal government has a role to play. And, what might that look like?
Right now, I think under the Liberal government, reconciliation is looking like a real thing. It's not just, comments that are made in the wind and only talked about one time of the year. I feel like the Liberal...
Because I noticed that some people are actually replacing land acknowledgements with acknowledgements of action.
Hey.
Just simply because there's a time for that, but perhaps maybe we, in some instances, maybe we need to talk about what we're going to do, right?
Right, for sure. I mean, first of all, the residential schools is just one little piece of the history, and not everybody gets it. I mean, when you have communities like in Manitoba, St. Madeleine, which there is celebrations for St. Madeleine that will come up in next month. This is a community that, because they, were already established and the government decided they wanted to tax the land, and the people of the community said, but I've already lived here forever, and couldn't quite understand why now they would have to start paying taxes on land that they'd been on forever. They just went in and burnt all their homes down, and burnt down their church, and burnt down their community. I mean, how do you fix that? Do you start by saying, okay, this community pasture that it's been sitting here as community pasture since we burnt down your homes, you can now have back the community pasture?
Right.
Is that enough? Most of those, people, the children at that time have passed on or are getting close to passing on, because it happened, so long ago, but not that long ago.
And it's interesting for me too, because in terms of how our community is changing, this is all new. This is Kishkimakwa, which is Long Plain First Nation. They did all the building here, and they're putting in a large gas station, and they've been very involved economically here, but also they're intertwined with our city. So to some, I believe that the future really is going to be working in partnership, which kind of brings me full circle because of the fact that that's how our community started. The first settlers that came here made an agreement outside. This was before any treaties were signed, but there was an agreement between the people that were here and the settlers were coming in, and about how they negotiated what that relationship would be like. And it's almost like we're getting back to it.
When I hear people talking about reconciliation and houses being built, for Indigenous people or for low-income people, that tells me that we're moving in the right direction for reconciliation. We're actually paying attention to the communities again. We're actually helping them, and not just saying, here's the housing money,
right.
Good luck, or
right.
Or not. I feel like there's been more support in the last 5 to 7 years to help. What is it that you need to help move yourself forward, rather than here's what we are told we have to give you. And this is what we're told we have to do.
The change in the last 10 years or so in schools with, how we're addressing issues that had been, quite frankly, ignored. And, I can't help but think that, if we continue that, we're going to build better communities.
We will.
I've brought you out here to show you something. This is Hillside Cemetery, but over here is a mausoleum that the local heritage group has been working on restoring, because it was collapsing. It's the only mausoleum in cemetery, and it was put in because a young mom in 1919 it was in the hospital expecting a baby and came down with the flu, and she died from the Spanish influenza.
Yes.
And prior to COVID, that was the last time that our community actually had to shut down. And so for me, at that time, they had mask mandates, and they closed the schools and they closed public events in order to help spread the disease. I can't help but think that COVID mandates worked, but I wanted to get your opinion on what you think are the limits of COVID mandates. I mean, because that it is a political issue, and some people are saying mandate, but I mean, I think it saved lives. Mm-hmm. So, how should governments handle that in the future?
Well, because the Spanish flu was the last time that we had anything that massive.
Major, yeah.
And I can tell you that, my great-grandmother stood behind a glass at her house while she watched the procession for her husband go past, because he had died of the Spanish flu and she was unable to be at the funeral because of the risks of her, even herself. And I would say 100 years later, we made the same panic moves. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what was coming at us. We knew that we had our friends and family that were getting sick and dying. And I think that we did exactly what we thought we needed to do at the time.
Right.
I mean, maybe, hopefully, this doesn't happen again for another 100 years. And maybe it does happen. But I bet you if it doesn't happen for another 100 years, everyone's going to panic the same way that we did. Because you don't know. You don't want everybody to die. You don't know how dangerous things can be. At one time, we didn't know if COVID was going to last on the counter for 3 hours, if it could be on the door handle, if it was going to be airborne.
We spent a lot of time spraying, for sure we did.
And we were worried. We didn't know. And so hindsight is 20/20. When somebody said, okay, look it, all we needed to really do was to put on the masks a little earlier, to be honest with you. Right. And then maybe we wouldn't have had to be in lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't find it to be a major inconvenience, and I kind of, personally, I felt a lot of, the community in Portage, Prairie really came together. I remember the Long Plain First Nation sharing their supply
with us
our
as well,
in order that more people could get vaccinated. And I don't know, I felt a real sense of solidarity with a lot of people, but I know that, for some parts of our constituency, people, have questions about mandates, but from my perspective, and it's certainly from our organizational perspective, I think they helped, and I think they worked.
Yes, I'll tell you, it was a huge inconvenience for some people. Many people lost their jobs, but some people lost their homes. I mean, the decisions that were made to keep everybody as safe as possible. I can't say that you go back that you would, that you'd be doing it a lot differently. Perhaps you would still be, implementing those masks. I know that it was really hard for people to accept that, they couldn't have people come and visit them. I
experienced it. I had family in the hospital. So.
And I was going to say, I found it to be really devastating for the people that I know who lost their friends and family.
Yeah, for sure.
Through the whole pandemic. I have a friend who is a registered nurse. And she was in ICU dealing with COVID patients. And, some people were so against getting the mandate that they were unable to come and be with their loved ones when their loved ones passed away because they did not want to get the vaccine. The fear-mongering, perhaps. I'm not sure. But
I went through that.
It's devastating.
But I had to, I think a lot of people made decisions that they felt were for the greater good.
Absolutely.
I am. Before we're on the home stretch here, mm-hmm. and so I'm going to throw you a question that's always been a bit of a personal drum to beat. But that's that. If you look at our electoral system in the last election, just as an example, there are many examples I could give, but in the last election, I think the People's Party got 800,000 votes, and they got no seats at all. and the Green Party got 400,000 votes, and they managed to get 2 seats out of that. I mean, I can't help but think that on the face of it, that just seems unfair. I mean, is it time for an electoral overhaul?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I feel like we all need to take 10 minutes, read the news, get to know the policies of the parties, and know who you're following. Too many people are following a party based on one thing. And governments do multiple things. Right. They are the ones that decide what the laws are and what our programs look. And we cannot base that just on one thing. You know, we really do have to educate ourselves. That's the first thing. I think citizens of Canada need to educate themselves on who the parties really are. I'm hoping the fact that anyone even went and put their vote towards the People's Party tells me that the frustration with the Conservatives are here as well. Okay. And Conservatives are looking for another Conservative option. And I think that what the Conservatives need to do is to take a look at the policies of the Conservatives and the People's Party, and not just on 1 or 2 topics, but on all of it. And then ask yourself, is this the Canada you want to live in?
Right.
Because, I mean, that really comes down to that.
I think that's a fair comment for anybody. I mean, really, that's what you're voting on. What is your vision of Canada?
Yes, and it can't just be because this one thing benefits me. You have to think about it as a holistic approach. What is it that is going to happen eventually that makes you think, hey, this is the Canada I want to live in? And Manitoba, I was going door to door, and I'm telling you, we have not fought against the Conservatives and put up, a good option for too long. We've just conceded to the fact the Conservatives own the vote. And I think that we're starting to see this by-election that isn't the case. People are so excited to have a better option or a different option, something that isn't just conservative or really conservative. It represents who they want to be as Canadians and as Manitobans.
I really like that. That's a great way to end the interview, because you talked about that you need to present your vision of Canada. And I think you've done that. I think you've presented what you think our Canada should be like. Now, before we pull in here, is there anything you'd like to put on the record before we end?
I'm not a politician. And so for that reason, I think I speak a little bit more like your average Manitoban, and I talk a little bit more like your friend next door, and not as a politician. But I feel like that should be in our benefit. That means because I have actually had to live within the restraints and within the programs and within the services that exist in this province as a Manitoban.
So and I think we want to encourage everyone to run. I mean, not just people who maybe want necessarily a political career, but maybe people who just want to change their community for the better.
People who just are tired of accepting the status quo and know that there is more options and better options out there. And I, for one, can be a strong voice for, the underserved, the underrepresented, but as well as your average hardworking Manitoban who is sometimes getting lost in the shuffle because they don't fit within their priorities don't fit within reconciliation, and their priorities don't fit even with childcare or with education, but they are still living here in Manitoba, and they still want affordable housing, and they still want to have the opportunities to speak for themselves and have their voice heard. I know that women's issues is huge. I can't imagine that as Manitobans, we're really prepared to support a Canada that is taking steps backwards, taking rights away from the women, looking at the LGBTQ plus community as lesser than, deciding that they shouldn't have everything that is available to every other Canadian is crazy. And that's how I think I would probably wrap it up.
Well, I think you wrapped that up brilliantly.
Thank you so much for the time to do this.
Thank you. It was really nice.
It was really appreciate it, and I loved seeing all those sites. So,
well, we thought we'd take you on a little bit of a tour of our community.
I loved it.
So I think we're just under 50 minutes. So